Alright, so I gotta rant a little bit here. After all the work that I put through, or put in to get this engine done, and went to, I did a compression check on it. I was, of course, after my crankshaft change out and all of that crap. And it's still, compression was still low. So I dumped some oil in the cylinders, make sure I didn't have something wrong with the rings, you know, in case I installed them upside down or something, although I've checked several times. And the pressure didn't come up. So I knew it had to be timing or valve train or something like that. So I pulled one of the heads off and then stuck some water in the exhaust port, turned the head up on its side, stuck some water in the exhaust port, and then took my air hose and sprayed around the valves, and they're just bubbling like crazy. The frickin' valves are leaking. I don't know what it takes to get somebody to do a valve job and do it right. I should have checked it before I installed them. So this is a lesson to you guys. Check your valves. Pretty easy. It's pretty easy to do. Turn the head up on its side, put some water in the exhaust ports, and then blow around them. Turn your air compressor up as high as it'll go, basically. 120 is what I've got. And then just blow right around the edge, around the valve. And if it bubbles, it's leaking. Do that with all your valves, and turn the head over and do it on the intake side as well. Make sure they're all good before you put it back on there. Don't do what I did and assume that the machine shop did their job and did it right. So now they're in a box and they're going to go back on Monday morning. Today's Saturday night. So I just had to vent a little bit about it. And so Monday morning I'll get him on it and we'll see if he gets them fixed right this time. And if not, then I'm going, geez, what is it, 80 miles basically, down to the next town that I know has a good machine shop. And they're expensive, but they're a good machine shop. I mean, criminelli, if I could afford to get the tooling and do valves myself, I would. Because obviously I can't find anybody to do them right. The other machine shop that was here in town, I took some 6.5 diesel heads to them, and they screwed the pooch so royally bad, all of the valves had to be replaced. And I ended up taking it to that other machine shop 80 miles away so they could do it right. Cost me another almost $800 to get it fixed because they messed it up so bad. All of the stems were too tight, the guides were all too tight, and scored up a bunch of valves. It was just a total disaster. So if this guy can't fix it, then I guess I'm going. Oh man, I just can't even think about it. It just makes me so mad. You know, it's at least a week plus 2 trips down there. And you know, I do antique tractors, so pretty much every time I tear one apart, I'm going to have a head that needs to be tooled. So what am I going to do? Am I going to run it down there every single time? I mean, that's going to get old real fast. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking for, maybe start collecting the tools and start looking for the machinery to do the heads myself. You know, I'm not going to be able to do crankshafts or regrind cams or any of that crap, you know. If I really need any of that done, then I'll have to take it to the machine shop down 80 miles away. But at least I could do my own heads. And then most of the time when I go to rebuild an antique tractor, most of the engines are sleeved, so you know, you just put new sleeves and piston assemblies in there, and the crankshafts are fine. And 9 times out of 10 I'm trying to think the last time I even had to have a crankshaft turned. I can't even remember. So most of the time they're fine. It's just the head work. You pretty well every single time you tear one apart, you're going to find valves leaking, and you got, at the very least, you got to change valve seals, which I can do. I do have the tools to do that. That just takes a valve spring compressor. Not a big deal. But to grind the valves and grind the seats, I don't have the tooling for that. And back onto this cluster here, I took one of the heads and I tore it all apart, and I tried lapping the valves just in case they were maybe just a little bit pitted or something. He didn't quite get it smooth, and I couldn't even lap it out. It made no difference in how much the leak was, none whatsoever. So obviously they were way too bad. I don't know what he did. There was one valve out of 8, one valve that was sealed. The rest leaked like a sieve. All right, I'm going to stop ranting, and I'm going to get you some more video when I get the heads back and make sure that they're right. I'll show you how to test them real quick. I can't take credit for that. I saw that one on YouTube. I can't recall the guy's name, his username, so I can't give him credit for it, but this wasn't my idea. It was someone else's that I learned several years ago. But it works quite well. And I'll show you how to do that once I get the heads back and make sure that they're still good. Make sure that he gets them done right this time. Anyway, till next time, I guess. Okay, so I got my heads back from the machine shop, and I told you I would show you how to do this little test here. But obviously they didn't do a damn thing to the heads. They swore up and down, well, it's not leaking because it holds 20 inches of vacuum. Well, they've got a full-size vacuum pump, and they're sticking it on this, what is this? 15 cc, 10 cc maybe? Of course it's going to pull 20 inches of vacuum. Cut their vacuum supply in half, then stick it on there, and then see what it does. I know that it's leaking because I've got solvent in there, and it's pissing down the head. So anyway, here's a little demonstration. Now I'm just using a standard shop air hose here. See the bubbles? Bubbles. Bubbles. Not supposed to be doing that. See, I don't have a whole lot of pressure. I'm barely putting any on there. And yet, bubbles. Bubbles. What about this one? What do we find on this one? What do you think, huh? Bubbles. Bubbles. Imagine that. So yeah, to say I'm pissed off, that's a bit of an understatement. If a person can't do the simplest of jobs, they don't deserve to be in business. It's as simple as that. I cannot believe that they think that's acceptable, that they would just send them out. Oh, there's nothing wrong with them because it pulls 20 inches of vacuum. Of course it does. It's a tiny little head. Pull your head out of your ass and think a little bit. So now I got to figure out what I'm going to do with it, and this is pretty much the last straw. This is the second machine shop that screwed up my heads. The first one were a pair of diesel heads, and that cost me another $700 thereabouts to get them fixed right. So this is it. I'm getting the tooling, and I'm fixing my own heads. That's it. As long as they don't need plain, which most of my stuff are antiques, or they're not high performance. So I'm not building a race engine. So I really don't need to have the heads planed. Most of the time, if there's something really wrong with it, I'm just going to replace it anyway. But by the time you pay for all the machining, half the time you've bought a new head anyway. But I'm going to get the seat cutters and a valve grinder. I'm going to do my own damn heads, because all like antique tractors and old equipment that I'm always working on, most of the time, 90% of the time, they're just going to need a valve job. So that's it. I'm getting the tools. It's plain. It's as simple. It's just downright sad that I have to do that, but I guess that's the way it is these days. You just can't trust anybody to do a damn job. I'm so angry right now that I really want to kick something, but everything I have in here is of value to me, so I won't kick it. Alright, so let's go on to the next one. Now, granted, those were only two of the 4 valves. That was just, sorry, I'm really manhandling you guys now, but that was just one side. That was intake on one head. This will be intake on the other head. Wagers on what we see here? Anybody? Oh look, bubble. No, it's not leaking. Not at all. It's not leaking one little bit. I'm barely putting any air to the mother... Like, how could you possibly? How could you really be that stupid and still be in business? Honestly. I just don't get it. Alright, I guess that's enough of that. Alright, so the valves are done on this side. But this side, the intake side, I've had to cut quite a bit. And it's down to the point now where I'm concerned that they might get too hot and burn. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and replace these two. So I got a real nice sharp edge right there, so that's never good. So I'm just going to, this thing's been sitting so long I can't, no reason to be in a hurry at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and order some valves for it, and they're like, I think they're 30 bucks a piece, unfortunately, but I don't want to just nickel and dime and cut a corner and then have to tear it back apart, so I suppose that's that. You guys see my workbench here. It's just a wood bench. If you'll have a steel one, I suggest putting a piece of cardboard on it and lay the head so that it hangs out to expose the valve galley there. And then I've got these Irwin Quick Grip clamps, or thumb type clamp, and these things are awesome. They're not very expensive, so pretty nice to have. And then you can work on it. It's not super stable. I mean, it's not like I could lean on it, but I don't really need to do any more. Whoops. Put it in upside down. So since I've got those valves in, I'll just take something. I would recommend like a couple of pieces of 1x1 or something like that. Stick it up under here to prevent the valves from hitting the table. And just set it on there. And then just clamp it down. You see, that'll hold it off the table and holds it steady enough. You see, I'm actually pulling on it fairly hard and it stays put, so then you can work on your valves. Well, you can take, with it flipped over, you can take the valves out, and with it flipped this way, you can work on the seats. And I've already cut one seat. I'll probably go ahead and cut the other one today, and then get my valves ordered. So these are the tools that I got. This is called a Neway, N-E-W-A-Y. And cylinderheadservices, I believe, .com is where I got the tools. They seem to be the best price. Again, that's Cylinderhead Services online. So this is a Neway cutter. If you haven't already seen one, you can find some things about them online. This is a 46 and a 31. And the 46, coupled with the 45 degree on the valves, will give you a 1 degree interference, which helps clear shear carbon out of them, and for longevity, it's There's a lot of differing opinions online about it, and as I've said before, I'm not an engine machinist, but the 46 and 31 gave me the most bang for my buck because it's got 2-on-1. I wouldn't have to buy 2 different ones, so I can cut 2 different angles. I bought a couple of pilots, the 4.98, and then I bought the 5.0, just in case that my valves were a little worn, which they were, so I used the 5. So you set the pilot into the valve stem, a valve guide, and then you've got arrows, see 46 and an arrow to tell you which angle is which. And these are adjustable. Now, let's see if we can zoom in enough that you can see. Well, focus. Oy, sorry about that. Okay, it's going to be a little hard to see. You probably won't see, but you got to make sure that these teeth, see there's an adjustment on them, so they can slide back and forth. Make sure that they're not cutting into the head itself. And so then all I'm using is a drill. I didn't get the T-handle kit, which wasn't really necessary for me, but small amount of pressure and a fairly low speed. Really about as low as you can go on the speed. And you can see the filings. Whew, focus. There you go. See the filings. How many times am I going to hit the zoom the wrong direction? So then that'll cut your new seat. You can see it's nice and shiny there. So the more you cut it, the whiter that seat's going to get. And of course, there's a lot of information online. And since I'm not a machinist, I'm not going to go through all the little details about it. So I'm going to basically, so all you got to do is cut your valve seat, and you actually make it a little bit wider than you need. See, there's 3 tapers, there's 3 angles, so the more you cut it, the more you sink into that bottom taper, which makes your seat width wider and brings it farther up on here on the edge of the valve. Get a little closer so you can see what I'm talking about. On the edge of the valve, brings it up closer. You don't want it too close to the edge because it won't seal worth the crap, and it tends to burn valves. And too far up, and it won't heat transfer properly, or so I've been told. I don't really know exactly how all that works, but you know, kind of in the upper middle is where you're going to want it, or where I would want it. And so you cut the 45 to make it wider. See, this already has 3 angles on it, so I really don't need to cut that bottom angle. I just get the cut to the point where I need, or where I like it on the valve itself. And then I'll switch to the 32, or 31 rather, and cut that one to narrow it up. Because if you have your contact pattern too wide, it doesn't like to seal because there's too much. There's just too much space distributed, or too. Yeah, let's see. Yeah. You don't have enough tension from your spring to cover a wide width. So you have to narrow it up some so that it'll actually pinch tight enough to seal. So if you don't do that, I mean, if you cut it too wide, you're gonna have hell getting it to seal. So that's what this will do, and I'm probably going to wait until I get my new valves to narrow that contact pattern. This one I cut before I determined that I needed, or decided that I needed new valves. So I'm going to hopefully I'm okay with it, but we'll see. But you can get new seats. Kawasaki tells you to replace the whole head, and a factory head's like freaking $700 a piece. So You know, I bought the machine for 500 bucks. I've got, oh, let's see, 300, not including the retard who cut the valves and screwed them up. I've got about 350 in parts right now, and then I bought my tooling, which was another $600. But this can do pretty much anything small that I have. All my generators, my other four-wheeler. Let's see what else. My rototiller, all of that, all the small engine stuff. This will pretty much do. And then anything with the small valves like this. And then when I get into repairing my Farmall H and rebuilding the, well, I'll be overhauling the H, and then I'll be overhauling my W6. And I'll have to get new pilots, which are about $15 a piece. And there's all different size pilots for different size valve stems. You got to do some research and figure out which one you need. And then some new cutters, and these things are about $65 a piece, so they're not too bad. I am of the opinion, and it was a steep learning curve, so it's taken me a long time to figure out all the little ins and outs on how these things work and exactly the best way to do it. Like I said, I'm not an engine machinist. If a person already knows the basics of engine valve machining, you can probably cut some of that time down. I didn't, so it was a pretty steep learn for me, but I've pretty well got it now. But the other head is on already, and I got it sealed up really nice. Got those valves done fairly well. So I just have these two left, and then I can put everything back together. But I'll show you the tool that's used to cut the valves. This thing was I think it was 350 bucks by itself. So this is the New Way Gizmatic, and this thing will cut up to 3-inch valves, and it's got two angles. It's got a 30-degree, which I don't know what valves, I haven't run across anything that uses a 30-degree even in my research yet, but I'm sure there are because they included it on this. This company seems to be pretty sharp. And then the other is the venerable 45. Get it in the frame here. Is the venerable 45. Sorry, my camera works terrible today, but so basically you get this kit. Comes with a V-block, soft jaws, and it floats. You stick the valve in there and seat it by hand. And then you crank the vise down, not super tight, just tight enough to hold it. And that's one of the things that you got to learn, is how tight to squeeze it. I started out too loose and the valve would start to work its way up. So then I went a little tighter until I got it to a point where it would stay, and then I knew how tight to get it. And it comes with the chip brush, and every time you cut, you got to clean the chips out, because otherwise it'll gall your valve. And it's a very slow process. This is not something I would recommend for a production shop for sure. This is, and at the price, it's intended for the home type mechanic or the small independent shop that does, you know, maybe one a month or one every 2 months or 2 or 3 a year. Even if you do 2 of them a year, you've paid for your tooling. So these machine shops have gotten expensive, and by golly, I have to go 60-some miles to get a good machine shop to do it. So since these valves are toast anyway, I'm going to go ahead and run this real quick so you guys can see it. So make sure all the chips are swept out. Drop the valve in, put a little bit of pressure. I'm not hogging on it, just a little bit of finger pressure, and then crank the vise and give it a snug. And oops, I forgot. You don't, according to the directions, you don't need oil on this to cut this, but I found I tried it without it just for grins, and I really didn't like how it cut. Just didn't feel smooth enough to me. So a little bit of oil, just regular old engine oil. Like I said, a finger pressure and a snug with the vise. And then I have one hand on the, this is the tensioning rod, tensioning handle, and then the other hand is on the I think we're crooked here. There we go. There, that's better. And then the other hand on the handle, and it turns clockwise, while the tensioning rod turns counterclockwise. So I start spinning, and then I cinch that tensioning rod. And I don't, this sucker will go from here all the way around. It's about 180, and I never go that tight. And then you just go, you're supposed to go about 1 revolution every 2 seconds, so it's quite slow. So this is about the happy spot. And I can feel that the valve has already gotten smoother, so I'm already to the point where my cut is clean. And I found, when I first tried it, I tried just continuing to put tension on there, and the results were not that pretty. So here's what I recommend. Cinch it down to about here, where you're feeling some resistance, and then run the handle until the resistance lightens up, and run it a few more times to make sure that it's smooth, that it feels fairly smooth, and then stop, release it, back off the vise, push the valve up out of there, and have a look at it. And you see how it's cutting. So we're cutting pretty nice. Now you can see that there are chips on the, well, I'll pop it off so you can see it. So you got chips on there, so you know that you're cutting. Like I said, this is a very slow process, and you got to be very patient. You don't want to go hogging it into there because you're not going to like the cut that it gives you. And you just keep doing that. Drop it in, cinch it, crank, and tighten down. And like I said, I wouldn't hog it because you're not going to like how the cut works out. Now you can tell by the sound that it's smoothed up already. So we're going to back it off, pop the valve out, and take a look. So if I had more material on this valve would be pretty well good to go. It's pretty well smoothed up. But since it's so damn sharp, I'm going to replace it. That's pretty much it. Crash course on the New Way Gizmatic. Comes in its own little blow molded case, which you can't see because it's out of frame. And here's the innards of it. So there's like a stiff rubber ring in there for self-centering. And so the only really problem that I can see with this setup is if you had a valve that was off-center, that was non-concentric. So, you know, you had the valve was thicker on this side than it was on this side. This thing's going to kind of walk around on that. It'd be really hard to fix that. So you'd probably end up replacing the valve with kit like this. You're not going to be able to fix anything that's too far out of concentricity. Making myself sound like an idiot the way I'm talking today. If it's too far out of concentricity, this thing's probably not going to fix it. I know I'm not speaking from experience, but just from my own mechanical aptitude and looking at how this thing is designed, I don't see how it could. I think eventually you could grind it off, but then you would have too much material taken off the valve. So you're probably going to end up replacing the valve anyway. So if you wanted to fix a non-concentric valve, you'd probably still have to have a valve grinder. And on some antiques that are really hard to find a good valve, that might be a good idea. So I might still end up with a valve grinding machine, but for now, this works. As long as the valve isn't too far out of concentricity, as long as it's fairly concentric, Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be close. And then this thing will take care of the rest. But if it's way out, this isn't going to fix it. That's you're going to chew up too much of the valve. That's basically it. I'll video more when I get my new valves and get them set in, and we'll finish assembly, I suppose. Alright, so I told you that I would show you testing the valves. I can't see Daily Bubkiss, so I hope it's... Here we go. Okay, so basically what I have is a Harbor Freight vacuum pump, hand pump. It's all you need. The gauge is in a little bit of trouble, but for our purposes it'll do what I need it to do. So basically, just take a tube of white lithium grease, smear it around your intake or exhaust port, whichever side you're testing. Take a suction cup. This one's kind of a cheap one. I need to find some better ones, but cut the nub off the end and drill a hole through it so you can stick your little vacuum port nipple through it. Shove it on there, and that grease will... the grease will give you a good seal, and then and it'll just easily wipe off. So we're just going to pump her up, and it's less about the amount of vacuum than it is what it does after you stop pumping. You guys can watch that. See how it's slowly dropping? If it drops quickly, you got a pretty serious leak. Now I don't see... let me preface this, I suppose, by saying I am not a machinist, I'm not an engine builder, I'm a mechanic. Fix things. I rebuild engines, I don't build high-performance engines. But in my book, that's plenty good enough. Oh, looks like we're getting a leak now. You know, if it drops slowly, I'd like to see it a little bit tighter than that, but and maybe an actual engine machinist can chime in on this, but the machine shop that I took it to took a vacuum pump, stuck it on there. Well, yeah, it's pulling 20 inches of vacuum. Well, yeah, of course it is. Look at that tiny little port. And you got a full-size vacuum pump on it. What you needed to do was stick this on there, pump it up as fast as you possibly could, and then see how quickly it drained. Now, I don't see any way, since these are just metal-on-metal seals and springs holding it closed, I don't see how you could ever get it to a point where it would never leak at all. I can't imagine that it would... again, maybe I'm wrong, but hopefully an actual machinist will chime in. And those of you who are trolling, I really don't care if you're just going to give me some BS answer. Oh no, it's got to work. If you're a qualified machinist, engine machinist, feel free to chime in and let me know if I'm wrong. But in my opinion, as long as it holds some sort of vacuum for a while, it should be plenty. It should work just fine. Like I said, I'm not building race engines. I don't see how you could get it to hold a vacuum indefinitely unless you smeared grease on the valves themselves, which obviously that'd be cheating. But for my purposes, for a non-racing engine, basically mostly antiques that I work with and my own stuff, see, I can pull about 20 inches of vacuum, hand pumping it, and then you see it drain down. In my book, like I said, I am not a machinist, but in my opinion, my professional opinion, that is good enough. I think that will give us plenty of compression, and I don't think the valves will burn up. So there you have it. That's an easy way to test these vacuum kits. If anybody's doing any of these, any cylinder head work at home, hell, if you do any engine work at home, and you pull the head off, you want to check the valves. So you're going to want one of these.